Value is not what you say you're worth. Value is what you consistently bring to the table when nobody's clapping. It's the skills you've stacked, the habits you've mastered, the standards you refuse to lower. High-value people don't beg for attention. They don't chase validation. They quietly become so solid that opportunities have no choice but to find them. Let's break this down into 5 principles that actually change lives, not slogans, not surface-level advice, but foundations. Most people misunderstand where real progress comes from because they confuse visibility with value. They assume that if something isn't seen, acknowledged, or rewarded immediately, it must not be working. That assumption quietly ruins lives. The truth is that nearly everything meaningful is built in silence first, long before it earns the right to be noticed. The early phase of growth is not designed to feel rewarding. It's designed to test whether you're serious or just emotionally attached to the idea of success. When you strip away the noise, value is created through repetition, not recognition, through boring consistency, not exciting moments, through showing up on days when motivation is low and the payoff feels distant. Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they cannot tolerate the silence that comes before results. They want feedback too soon. They want confirmation before competence. But life doesn't work that way. It withholds validation until the work has been done long enough to compound. Think about how skills are actually built. No one becomes competent by dabbling occasionally or working only when inspired. Competence comes from doing the same uncomfortable thing repeatedly, often without praise, often without clarity, often without proof that it will work. This is where many people unconsciously quit, not because they decide to stop, but because they start dividing their focus. They half commit, they multitask their ambitions, they work, but not deeply. They practice, but not deliberately. They stay busy to avoid the discomfort of true concentration. Silence exposes intent. When there is no audience, no applause, no immediate reward, the only thing that keeps you going is your understanding of long-term cause and effect. You either believe that disciplined effort today creates leverage tomorrow, or you don't. If you don't, you'll look for distractions. You'll start explaining instead of improving. You'll start posting about progress instead of making it. And slowly, without drama, your potential decays. There is a cost to everything, including attention. Every hour spent chasing validation is an hour not spent sharpening ability. Every conversation about plans replaces time that could have been used executing them. This isn't about isolation or arrogance. It's about opportunity cost. Focus is finite. Energy is finite. If you scatter them, the results will reflect that fragmentation. People who look productive but never seem to advance are usually paying this hidden price. They are present everywhere except where it matters most. Silence also forces honesty. When no one is watching, there's no performance to hide behind. You find out how disciplined you really are. You learn whether you can keep promises to yourself. This is uncomfortable because self-image collapses without external feedback. You can't rely on praise to carry you through resistance. You either build internal standards or you drift. And drifting feels easier in the moment, but it compounds into regret over time. Consider the difference between someone who trains quietly for years and someone who constantly announces their intentions. The first person may look invisible for a long time. The second may look confident and ambitious, but outcomes are shaped by depth, not declarations. When pressure arrives, when opportunity demands competence, the difference becomes obvious. One is prepared, the other is exposed. This is not luck. It's math. Consistent effort multiplied over time always beats sporadic intensity. People often underestimate how much silent effort they can sustain if they stop trying to impress anyone. Performance drains energy. Practice builds it. When you remove the need to be seen, you can redirect that energy into precision. You start paying attention to details. You notice where you're weak instead of hiding it. You make small adjustments that no one claps for, but that quietly raise your baseline. Over time, those adjustments create a gap that others don't know how to close. There is also a psychological advantage to being underestimated. When expectations are low, you have room to develop without pressure. You're free to experiment, fail privately, and recalibrate. People who announce their ambitions too early often become trapped by them. They start protecting an image instead of pursuing truth. They avoid necessary discomfort because it might contradict how they're perceived. Silence removes that trap. It gives you flexibility. It gives you space to grow honestly. Discipline thrives in quiet environments. Loud environments reward reaction. Notifications, opinions, constant comparison. These fracture attention. Deep work requires monotony. It requires the ability to sit with boredom and resist the urge for stimulation. This is not a personality trait. It's a trained skill. People who master it don't look exciting day to day. They look ordinary, but ordinary routines executed with consistency produce extraordinary leverage over time. Many people sabotage themselves by constantly checking whether their effort is being noticed. That checking interrupts momentum. It shifts focus outward instead of inward. Growth slows because attention is split between the work and the audience. The irony is that the fastest way to be noticed is to stop trying to be noticed. Results speak when explanations become unnecessary. This doesn't mean isolation from life or people. It means intentional silence around your process. You don't need to narrate your journey. You don't need permission to work. You don't need early approval. You need patience and a clear understanding that value creation is delayed by design. If it were instant, everyone would have it. The delay is the filter. Silence also builds emotional resilience. When you're not constantly rewarded, you learn to regulate yourself. You learn to work through doubt instead of escaping it. This strengthens decision-making. You become less reactive, less dependent on mood, less influenced by external noise. Over time, this emotional steadiness becomes part of your value. People trust those who are grounded, not those who fluctuate with attention. Every meaningful outcome has an invisible phase. Businesses, skills, character, reputation, none of these are built publicly at first. They start as private commitments honored repeatedly. The problem isn't that people don't know this. The problem is they don't respect it. They rush the process and then wonder why the foundation collapses. If you want to increase your value, you have to accept the trade-off. Fewer visible wins now in exchange for real leverage later. That means saying no to distractions that feel good but don't build anything. It means choosing consistency over excitement. It means being willing to look inactive while you're actually compounding. This choice feels lonely at times. That loneliness isn't a sign you're wrong. It's often a sign you're early. Silence is not absence, it's concentration. It's where standards are formed, skills are sharpened, and identity is built without distortion. People who understand this don't rush. They don't panic when progress is slow. They measure themselves by effort, not applause, and when their work finally becomes visible, it doesn't surprise them. They've already lived with it long enough to know it was inevitable. Most people approach life with a quiet misunderstanding about how opportunity actually works. They believe opportunity is something you receive, something granted by timing, luck, or the approval of others. So they move through their days asking an unspoken question: what can I get from this? What can this job give me? This relationship give me? This situation give me? The question feels reasonable, even practical. But over time, it creates a subtle weakness. When your primary orientation is toward taking, your leverage remains limited to what others are willing to hand you. Value operates on a different logic. Value grows in proportion to usefulness. The more problems you can solve reliably, the more options life offers you. This isn't philosophical, it's observable. In any workplace, the person who can handle only one narrow task stays dependent. The person who can step into multiple roles becomes necessary, not because they demand more, but because the system would struggle without them. Necessity creates leverage. Leverage creates choice. This requires a shift in focus that many people resist because it feels unfair at first. Increasing what you offer often means giving more than you immediately receive. It means learning skills before they are rewarded. It means investing energy into areas that don't produce instant returns. Emotionally, this feels like being taken advantage of if you don't understand the long game. Rationally, it's how value is built. Every useful skill you acquire expands the range of problems you can solve. Every problem you solve well increases your relevance. Look at everyday situations. In most teams, there's someone who complains about being overlooked. They feel underpaid, underappreciated, underestimated. Sometimes they're right, but often, when you look closely, their contribution hasn't expanded. They do what they were hired to do, nothing more, nothing less. That might feel fair, but fairness doesn't create leverage. Value does. Meanwhile, someone else quietly learns how adjacent systems work, how processes connect, how to fix issues others avoid. They don't announce it, they just become useful in more situations. Over time, they trusted more, consulted more, and eventually compensated more. The difference wasn't politics. It was usefulness compounded over time. This principle extends beyond work. In relationships, people who focus on what they can give stability, honesty, emotional maturity tend to build stronger bonds. Those who focus primarily on what they're owed often cycle through disappointment. This isn't about self-sacrifice without boundaries. It's about understanding that contribution precedes influence. If you want to matter, you have to matter to the system you're in. That requires effort directed outward before it returns inward. The trade-off is discomfort. Learning new skills feels inefficient. You're bad before you're competent. You spend time struggling with concepts others already understand. This creates friction with the ego. It's tempting to stay in familiar territory where you feel capable, even if that territory no longer grows your value. Many people choose comfort over expansion without realizing the long-term cost. The cost shows up later as stagnation, dependency, and frustration. Opportunity cost is always present. Every hour spent consuming without learning is an hour not spent building capacity. Every excuse about not having time is a decision about priorities. People often say they want more options, but their daily behavior suggests otherwise. Options are created by preparation. Preparation requires sustained effort in areas that don't feel immediately rewarding. That's why most people avoid it. Not because it's impossible, but because it's inconvenient. There's also a difference between being busy and being useful. Activity can be a form of avoidance. You can fill your schedule with tasks that don't increase your problem-solving ability and still feel productive. But productivity without skill acquisition plateaus quickly. Usefulness, on the other hand, compounds. A skill learned once can be applied repeatedly. It saves time later. It increases efficiency. It changes how others perceive and rely on you. This is where discipline matters. Discipline is choosing to invest in capacity even when there's no immediate demand for it. It's studying systems you're not yet responsible for. It's practicing skills you don't urgently need. It's preparing for problems before they appear. People who think this way aren't reactive. They're positioned. When opportunity arises, they're ready not because they're lucky, but because they've already done the work. Emotionally, this approach builds confidence grounded in reality, not the fragile confidence of praise, but the quiet assurance that comes from competence. You don't need to convince others of your value when your abilities consistently solve real problems. This reduces anxiety. It stabilizes decision-making. You become less dependent on approval because your worth is demonstrated through action. Misplaced focus shows up when people chase status instead of skill. Titles, attention, and appearances feel like progress, but they don't always increase what you can offer. When conditions change, status evaporates. Skills remain. People who prioritize image over ability often struggle when environments shift. Those who invested in usefulness adapt. They find new roles, new paths, new ways to contribute. This is not about doing everything for everyone. It's about strategic contribution. You choose areas where your effort has the highest return over time. You learn skills that stack, that complement each other, that make you harder to replace. This requires long-term thinking. It requires resisting the urge to demand immediate reward. It requires trusting that effort directed toward capacity eventually pays off in freedom. Freedom is the real outcome of increased value. When you can offer more, you depend less. You negotiate from strength. You can walk away from situations that don't align with your standards. This isn't entitlement, it's earned flexibility. The people who have the most options are usually the ones who spent years quietly becoming useful. The uncomfortable truth is that no one owes you opportunity. Systems respond to contribution, not intention. If you want more, you have to become more in ways that matter to the world around you. This isn't pessimistic, it's empowering. It puts control back in your hands. You may not control circumstances, but you control how much value you bring into them. And over time, that control changes everything. People like to believe that growth is a purely internal process, that if you are disciplined enough and focused enough, your environment doesn't really matter. This belief sounds empowering, but is incomplete. Environment is not just background noise. It is an active force that either reinforces your standards or slowly erodes them. You don't rise or fall only because of your willpower. You rise or fall because of what your daily surroundings normalize. Over time, what feels normal becomes what feels acceptable, and what feels acceptable becomes what you stop questioning. Human behavior is deeply influenced by proximity. You adopt the pace, priorities, and emotional habits of the people you spend the most time around, often without realizing it. This isn't weakness, it's psychology. If your environment treats distraction as harmless, discipline as extreme, and ambition as unrealistic, maintaining focus becomes a constant uphill battle. You can fight it for a while, but fighting your surroundings consumes energy that could have been used to build something meaningful. The danger is subtle. It rarely looks like sabotage. It looks like comfort. It looks like laughter, familiarity, shared routines, and unspoken agreements to not outgrow one another. No one explicitly says, stay small. Instead, the environment rewards behaviors that keep everyone at the same level. You get approval for complaining, for staying busy without progress, for choosing convenience over effort. Slowly, standards lower, and because it happens gradually, it feels reasonable. Every environment has a cost structure. Some places demand discipline. Others reward excuses. Some circles push you to sharpen your thinking. Others encourage emotional release without responsibility. The question isn't whether you can survive in a low-standard environment. You probably can't. The real question is what it will cost you over time. Every day you spend in an environment that doesn't support your long-term vision is a day you pay opportunity costs. That cost compounds quietly. Consider someone trying to change their habits while staying in the same routines, with the same people having the same conversations. They start with intention, maybe even momentum. But each day they are reminded of who they used to be. Jokes, comments, expectations all pull them backward. They skip one workout, then another. They delay one study session and stop entirely. Not because they lack discipline, but because discipline without environmental support requires constant resistance. Resistance is exhausting. Emotionally, this creates conflict. Outgrowing an environment feels like betrayal. There's guilt in choosing differently, especially when people interpret your growth as rejection. This is where many people compromise. They lower their standards just enough to stay connected. They keep one foot in the old environment and one foot in the new direction. That split focus feels manageable at first, but is destructive long term. Divided priorities dilute effort. You can't fully commit to growth while constantly negotiating comfort. The choice to change your environment doesn't always mean leaving physically. Sometimes it means setting boundaries that make you less available for distractions. Sometimes it means spending less time in conversations that go nowhere. Sometimes it means seeking out fewer people but higher quality interactions. All of these choices come with trade-offs. You may feel lonely. You may feel misunderstood. You may lose access to easy validation. But what you gain is clarity. Clarity is underrated. When your environment aligns with your goals, decisions become simpler. You don't have to constantly motivate yourself to do the right thing because the right thing is supported by your surroundings. Discipline becomes less about force and more about structure. This is why high-performing people are intentional about where they spend their time. Not because they think they're better than others, but because they understand how fragile focus really is. Misplaced loyalty is one of the most common ways people sabotage their future. Loyalty to habits that no longer serve them. Loyalty to people who benefit from their stagnation. Loyalty to environments that feel safe but limit growth. Loyalty is valuable, but only when it's aligned with truth. Loyalty that requires you to abandon your potential is not virtue. It's fear disguised as principle. There's also the reality that some environments are designed around distraction, constant noise, constant stimulation, constant emotional swings. These environments make deep thinking difficult. They reward reaction instead of reflection. Over time, this conditions the mind to avoid stillness. Without stillness, long-term planning becomes nearly impossible. You start living from moment to moment, responding instead of directing. Life begins to happen to you instead of through you. People often underestimate how much mental energy is drained by being around low standards. You hear complaints, negativity, and excuses so often that they start sounding logical. Your internal dialogue changes. You lower expectations for yourself not because you consciously choose to, but because it feels normal to do so. This is how environments discount value. Not through one big decision, but through thousands of small, unchallenged assumptions. Changing your environment requires self-respect. It means believing that your future deserves protection. It means understanding that proximity is not neutral. Every place you stay shapes who you become. Every group you tolerate reinforces certain behaviors. This doesn't mean you judge others. It means you judge outcomes. You look honestly at where your current path leads and decide whether that destination is acceptable. Discipline grows faster in environments where effort is respected, even if results are slow. Ambition feels less risky when you're surrounded by people who think long-term. Focus becomes easier when distractions aren't constantly justified. These environments don't have to be perfect. They just need to be intentional. They need to support growth more than they support comfort. The trade-off is emotional discomfort now versus regret later. Staying in a misaligned environment feels easier in the short term because it avoids conflict. Leaving or setting boundaries creates tension. But tension is temporary. Stagnation is not. One passes with time, the other compounds with age. Ultimately, your environment is a mirror. It reflects back what you tolerate, what you prioritize, and what you believe you deserve. If you want to increase your value, you have to place yourself where that value is required, challenged, and sharpened. Otherwise, even your best intentions will slowly dull. Not because you weren't capable, but because you stayed where growth was optional. Most people overestimate how much raw talent matters and underestimate how much reliability shapes outcomes. They believe that being impressive once is more valuable than being dependable over time. This belief feels intuitive because dramatic moments are easier to notice than steady ones. But when you observe how trust is actually formed in real life, a different pattern emerges. Trust grows from consistency. And trust, whether in work, relationships, or reputation, is one of the highest forms of value a person can have. Consistency is not exciting. That's why it's rare. It requires doing the same thing well repeatedly without novelty to keep you entertained. It means showing up when you don't feel sharp, when your mood is low, when external circumstances aren't ideal. Most people don't fail because they can't perform at a high level occasionally. They fail because they can't maintain a standard when conditions are ordinary or uncomfortable. Over time, this inconsistency becomes their identity, even if they don't intend it to. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We don't judge others by isolated actions. We judge them by what we can reasonably expect from them. If someone is great one day and unreliable the next, we adjust our expectations downward, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. Unpredictability creates risk. Predictability creates safety. And safety is what people reward with responsibility, opportunity, and influence. This applies everywhere. In work, the person who consistently delivers acceptable results is often trusted more than the person who occasionally delivers exceptional ones, but disappears or misses deadlines. In relationships, the person who shows up emotionally steady builds deeper bonds than the person who offers grand gestures followed by absence. Consistency signals respect. It says, "You can count on me," without having to say it out loud. The uncomfortable part is that consistency requires sacrificing emotional impulses. You don't get to act only when you're inspired. You don't get to wait until conditions feel right. You have to operate based on commitment rather than mood. This is where many people quietly fall short. They confuse authenticity with reactivity. They believe honoring how they feel in the moment is honesty, even when it undermines their long-term goals. But discipline is not dishonesty. It's delayed emotional gratification in service of a larger outcome. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, you reinforce internal trust. Every time you break one, you weaken it. This internal trust shapes external behavior. People who don't trust themselves struggle to be consistent because they negotiate with their own standards constantly. They look for exceptions. They rationalize shortcuts. Over time, these small compromises accumulate into a reputation, even if no one explicitly calls it out. Consistency also exposes priorities. What you do regularly reveals what you truly value, regardless of what you say. If you claim growth matters but your actions are sporadic, the truth is growth is optional to you. If you claim discipline matters but only practice it when it's convenient, discipline is a preference, not a principle. Outcomes respond to principles, not preferences. There's a cost to inconsistency that people often overlook. When others can't predict you, they stop investing in you. They limit how much responsibility they give you. They reduce how much they rely on you. This doesn't always happen consciously. It shows up subtly. You're left out of decisions. You're not the first person called when opportunities arise. Not because you're disliked, but because uncertainty is inefficient. Systems move toward what's stable. Consistency, on the other hand, compounds quietly. When you show up repeatedly, even at a moderate level, your reliability becomes an asset. People adjust their plans around you. They account for you. This creates momentum. One opportunity leads to another, not because you demanded it, but because you reduce friction. Reliability lowers risk, and low risk attracts opportunity. This doesn't mean perfection. Consistency is not about never failing. It's about how you respond to failure. Do you disappear, make excuses, or shift blame? Or do you adjust, communicate, and return to standard? People don't expect flawlessness. They expect follow-through. They expect effort to resume. That's what maintains trust. Misplaced focus often undermines consistency. People try to do too many things at once, spreading their energy thin. They commit broadly but shallowly. This creates the illusion of ambition but produces scattered results. Consistency requires choosing fewer priorities and honoring them daily. This involves opportunity cost. Saying yes to one commitment means saying no to others. Many people avoid this choice because it feels limiting. But without limitation, there is no depth. Without depth, consistency collapses. Long-term thinking reframes consistency as strategy rather than obligation. You stop asking whether you feel like showing up and start asking what kind of person you're becoming through repetition. Each day becomes a vote for a certain identity. Over time, those votes accumulate. You don't wake up disciplined one day. You practice discipline until it becomes normal. You don't suddenly become trusted. You act reliably until trust becomes assumed. Emotionally, consistency creates calm. When you know you will do what you said you would do, anxiety decreases. Decision fatigue reduces. You don't waste energy renegotiating with yourself. This frees mental bandwidth for higher level thinking. Ironically, discipline creates freedom, not restriction. It simplifies life by removing unnecessary choices. People often chase intensity because it feels productive. They work in bursts, driven by emotion or urgency. This can create short-term results, but it's unstable. When intensity fades, so does progress. Consistency doesn't rely on emotion, it relies on structure. Structure survives moods. That's why it wins over time. There's also a social dimension to consistency. When others see you operate steadily, they adjust how they treat you. They take your words seriously. They respect your boundaries. They don't test you as much. Inconsistent people invite pressure because their limits are unclear. Consistent people set expectations through behavior. The discipline required for consistency is not dramatic. It's quiet. It's choosing to go to bed on time. It's doing the unglamorous part of the work. It's resisting the urge to skip what no one will notice today. But someone always notices eventually, your future self. The version of you that lives with the consequences of today's patterns. Every long-term outcome is built on repeated actions that felt insignificant at the time. That's why people underestimate them. They want results that feel proportional to effort. Consistency feels disproportionate. Small actions repeated, creating large effects. This disconnect causes impatience. People quit because the return feels too small early on. They don't realize the curve hasn't steepened yet. Trust, once built, becomes a form of capital. It opens doors that talent alone cannot. It creates margin for error. It gives you influence without force, but it cannot be rushed. It can only be earned through time and repetition, and it can be lost quickly through neglect. If you pay attention, you'll notice that the people who move steadily forward rarely talk about discipline. They embody it. Their lives look simple from the outside because they've removed the chaos of inconsistency. They do fewer things, but they do them reliably. And over time, that reliability becomes the reason their value keeps rising while others plateau. Most people don't fail because they aim too high. They fail because they think too short. They measure progress in days and weeks while life measures outcomes in years. This mismatch quietly creates frustration. When effort doesn't produce immediate rewards, doubt creeps in. People start questioning the path, the strategy, and eventually themselves, not because the direction is wrong, but because their time horizon is too narrow to see what's actually happening. Short-term thinking feels practical because it offers quick feedback. You work, you get a result, you adjust. That works for simple tasks, but anything meaningful operates on delayed returns. Skills, reputation, trust, wealth, health. None of these grow in straight lines, they compound. Compounding is invisible at first, which makes it psychologically uncomfortable. Early effort produces little visible change, so the mind assumes the effort is wasted. This assumption is costly. The disciplined mind understands that early effort is not meant to feel proportional. It's meant to build momentum beneath the surface. Most people abandon long-term strategies right before they start working because they mistake silence for failure. They don't see the accumulation happening, so they switch directions, chasing something that promises faster results. Over time, this pattern creates a life of constant movement with very little depth. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity. In reality, it's active restraint. It's the decision to keep executing a plan even when emotional impulses demand novelty. This restraint is rare because it requires faith grounded in logic, not hope. You have to understand why consistency over time works, not just believe that it might. When you understand compounding, impatience looks irrational. But without that understanding, patience feels like self-denial. Look at everyday behavior. Someone starts a routine, learning a skill, improving health, building something from scratch. The first few months are uncomfortable and unrewarding. Progress is slow. There's no external validation. Meanwhile, others appear to be moving faster, posting wins, talking about breakthroughs. Comparison distorts perception. The slow builder begins to question whether they're